You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to begin? Look no further. The team at Dodge Media Productions has 20 years of experience as podcast listeners and observing the industry and 8 years experience in podcast production. We can help you take your podcast from idea to fruition, and we'll make the process seamless and easy. We'll help you with everything from recording and editing to hitting the charts on Apple Podcasts. So what are you waiting for? Contact us today and let's get started. DodgeMediaProductions.com.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about a movie called The Smashing Machine. The Smashing Machine is the same name as a documentary about the same person, Mark Kerr. He was a cage fighter in the early days. There's
so
also,
is that his wrestling nickname?
I believe
like
it was.
The Rock or...
Yeah, that was his fighting pseudonym.
Oh, okay. Because they didn't, did they? I don't remember them saying that in the movie.
I don't think they did, and that makes me think my memory is perhaps faulty, but I
but
thought
why
that
would it
was
be
his
named
nickname.
that? So that makes sense.
Right. And I forgot to reach out to Superfan Ernie to check on this, but I feel like he was in the era, along with Dan Severn, where these heavyweight wrestlers dominated because they were able to take the other person down to the mat and then headbutt them into submission. Mm-hmm. And early in the film, they talk about rule changes, and someone says, oh, they took away your entire game. Mm-hmm. I don't know the history of the sport that well, but I think that was part of why he was dominant at the time, which is kind of terrifying as a person who is not a gigantic wrestler, that one of these fellows could just grab you and throw you to the ground and start headbutting you into submission. It's pretty terrifying. And I think they captured a good line between showing that part of it, of the UFC in those days, and not making it too much a movie about fighting or violence or what have you. Mm-hmm. It's like when we rewatched Rocky and how little of the film is actually the boxing match. Even though it was a lot of effort, it was a film that was more about the relationship between Mark Kerr and his wife, and I think his kind of career desires, more than it was a film necessarily about cage fighting, which is a bit of a surprise for me. Going into it, I thought it would be more...
Didn't you say you wanted it to be F1, but for UFC?
That was what my hope was, right?
Which I think, as someone who enjoys like dramas, especially when people are wrestling with their own demons, I think I liked this style of movie.
Yeah.
Because
sense.
I think what I really liked about it is Don wasn't the hero and he wasn't the hero. They both were flawed people, as a lot of us are. I don't say that judgmentally. I think I see myself in both of them. But anyway, and just how we fight those demons from our past, whether it be negative voices or, past traumas or just the desire to be loved and, just everything that they were, no pun intended, wrestling with.
Point. Yeah, I think it was probably a more broadly appealing movie because of that. F1 is a little bit of a different story because that's a Hollywood blockbuster, and this was not. One of our friends, award-winning filmmaker Dustin Morrow, has mentioned that this film was a financial loss for A24. A quick check of IMDb says a budget of $40 million and gross of $20 million, which would indicate a bit of a loss if you're only going on that. We don't know what they might possibly get in foreign markets or on streaming, but I think this could have been, in some sense, a loss leader for A24. They want to get something that gets more award consideration, similar to Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was maybe less budget, but they, I think, perhaps want to legitimize themselves by making more Oscar bait movies.
Right, and I wonder if two things. Could this movie benefit, and I haven't heard rumblings, this is total speculation out of my ear, we'll say, to keep it G-rated. Two things. A large part of the narrative was fights that occurred in Japan.
Correct.
So could there potentially get a bump when or if it's released in the Japanese market or even on streaming for Japanese viewers? Because could this be like people of a certain age who watched and was a fan of Cares when he was fighting in Japan, would they get a bump there? And then my second thought is, because I really am hopeful, because I really enjoyed this film. I think that The Rock deserves an Oscar nomination because
Agreed.
he completely became Mark Kerr. And there was one scene, which maybe we could talk about later.
We will.
Other than that, you forgot it was Dwayne Johnson, which is hard to do when you're his size and stature and
So recognizable.
and iconography.
Yeah.
But anyway, so depending on what this current 2025's Oscar season looks like, if there aren't a lot of other strong contenders, I really hope for Dwayne's sake that he at least gets a nomination. I don't think Hollywood would necessarily give him the win, or I think we would have heard more about this movie.
Could be.
But my secret hope, or not so secret now that I'm saying it on this podcast, I'm proudly proclaiming, I really, if I had an Academy vote, would give him a nomination.
Absolutely, I think this is The Rock's finest acting work. Certainly credit should go to the makeup artist who applied the prosthetics, because there were some prosthetics obviously involved. Now, you mentioned the one thing where we both reacted in the theater as we were watching it. There is a scene.
We reacted, but it wasn't obvious to one another that the other one, it wasn't until we were driving home that we
Right.
said, well, there was that one scene, and then we both realized we tracked it.
So the character, he shaves his head, and they have, I don't know, it was a couple seconds, maybe a medium shot, and it was obviously The Rock.
I know.
It was the only time in the theater, or in the movie, where I felt like he looked like The Rock. So much so, and the scene was short enough, where I to this day wonder if that was a pickup and they couldn't get the same makeup guy, and so it was just
I wonder the exact same thing.
The Rock. They basically did a shoot in some conference room somewhere. We need this insert. Anyway.
Nobody will notice.
Except for that one guy in Oregon.
Yeah, but it was so obvious, and I was like, is it just because he lacks the hair? So I'm not kidding. When
No.
it comes out on streaming, I'm skipping ahead and holding a
Right.
picture of him as Mark Kerr on my phone. And is it Kerr or Carr?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll keep saying Kerr, and then
Let's say Kerr.
and if somebody knows better, they can comment
Right.
on our either YouTube video or on our podcast streams and let us
Right.
know. But because isn't Kerr
Right. And there's an actress, Deborah Carr, who
and
is...
hers an E?
I think it's an E, but it was said Carr. If I
Carr,
remember. I just
yeah.
remember there was a confusion
Okay.
about how you pronounced her name. It was enough that the studio had to release a press statement. It was a difficult name.
Okay, I'm gonna do a side by side because I am positive that he is not wearing the prosthetics.
Right.
It's not just that he shaved his head, but
However,
I'm happily proven wrong.
unfortunately, between now and then, they maybe will have heard the podcast and digitally fix that footage.
Wouldn't that be great?
Wouldn't it be great? But the reason that comes up is because, as you mentioned before, The Rock is such a recognizable figure.
Mm-hmm.
And recently, I have been commenting that as much as I like Pedro Pascal's work, he's been in so much that it starts to take me out of the film. And I found this an interesting thing, that there is this part where suddenly the actor becomes recognizable enough as the actor that now they're fighting against it. Whereas when they start their career, they're fighting to be recognizable. But then when you get to The Rock's level, now they had to go against that so that you didn't think I'm watching The Rock in a wrestling movie.
Well, it's such a fascinating point because I remember when I was going to film school, we learned about iconography and that actors bring a certain level of their iconography to a film.
To a role,
And
yes.
studios would often use that to their benefit. So Marilyn Monroe, you put Marilyn Monroe in a movie, no one's going to forget that it's Marilyn Monroe, but
No.
that almost goes to your benefit because everybody's there to see the next Marilyn Monroe film. But to some degree, that can be a negative. For example, this is not my opinion because I love this movie, but Mamma Mia, the very first one with Meryl Streep, I remember reading a review that said that they never forgot that it was Meryl Streep singing the songs. They never believed that she was her character. This reviewer in this review.
Correct.
I would say that maybe I agree, but I loved seeing Meryl Streep singing in that movie. I would watch that movie over and over and over and over. It's one of my favorites. Partially benefits maybe from the discography of Mamma Mia songs because they're such fun, great songs.
Right.
That it was this fun sing-along. And then, Meryl Streep happens to be the one who's singing. Anyway, I say all that to say it can be a benefit and it can be a detriment. And I think when you have somebody as charismatic as The Rock,
Yes,
and as iconic, and he can raise that eyebrow,
Yeah.
and he just brings with him a stature and that it factor, right? He probably, I bet you've watched more WWE documentaries.
Right.
I bet they all said he had that it factor. And he completely, I don't want to
Disappeared.
say dumbs that down, but he nullifies it in a way. That's why he's so deserving of an Oscar nom, because he takes away all the charisma and all that it factor that makes him The Rock
Right.
to become Mark.
It would be the equivalent of Ryan Reynolds taking on a role where you don't recognize that it's Ryan Reynolds. Right? Somebody who is so known for, like you said, their charisma, to then submerge that into a role, that is amazing. And that's why I think he deserves at least an Oscar nom for this. Of course, as does the makeup artist, because the prosthetics they did were so realistic, so perfectly done. That's amazing as well. It was also an interesting choice from the filmmaker to do it. I heard they shot it on film, which maybe is where much of the $40 million budget went to, because he was trying to evoke a documentary style. And the film, I think that didn't land as well for me. I thought that was maybe working against the film in some sense, that style of doing it, lots of handheld, right?
Yeah, as a lover of docs, I very much did feel like it was a documentary style.
Yep. And they landed that.
They did, because there was a lot of, I don't know how to phrase it, but like the composition of the shots, it felt like the camera was very far away in that voyeuristic.
Correct.
You know, like the camera was over in the corner, and the subject forgot it was there, and so they would misbehave or.
And the director said, I think it was on the DJ podcast, that they specifically avoided putting the camera in the ring for any of the shots because they didn't want it to be artificial.
Like
they
Raging Bull.
wanted it to be like you were at the match.
Mm-hmm.
So I get what they're doing. I personally, when he said he wanted it to be a conversation with the previous documentary, I wish they had gone a little bit more to narrative film, me personally, as a kind of compliment to the documentary. But that's just my aesthetic, right? I think it worked just fine. I maybe would have made a slightly different choice, but I thought that worked well. I thought the direction was just fine. It was amazing. They said that they built the entire house on a sound stage, and it makes a little bit of sense. So there's a scene where the character played by The Rock destroys some things, so it makes it a little easier for the art department to replace doors and vases and things. It definitely had the mood where I was concerned for Don's welfare at several points. So in that sense, the storytelling did very well because they got me invested in the character and there was real trauma, even though I knew that she didn't get killed by him, because I would have known at the time, right? I knew that there was no murder scandal for him. So I knew she would be okay, but I still, even though I knew that intellectually, in the film, they had me on the edge of my seat. I cared for this character. I definitely wanted him to do well. I think I have some sympathy for addictions of all sorts, and this I thought was a good investigation of a different kind of addiction. The drugs were kind of secondary to his competitive nature. So I thought, all in all, this is a surprisingly good film. And I say surprisingly because it was good in a way I didn't expect.
I was just going to say while you're talking, what was so well done, I guess you attribute the writers and I think the actors for portraying this. At the same time that I'm rooting for these two to get together, because I guess, we all long for that happy ending, right? You want them both to figure out like, oh, I'm screwing up because I'm enabling him, or I'm screwing up because I'm dependent on these substances, or I'm so focused on winning, or you want them to kind of have that realization so that then they will come to their senses in a way that is healthier and better for both of them. But at the same time, you're going, oh, these two should not be together. Like, they're just not good for one another. No. And so it's, spoiler, there's a title card at the very end. I guess I'll say, that tells you what ended up becoming of these two. And in a way, it wasn't a surprise.
It's not surprising. No,
and almost like
not.
You're like, okay, good. Hopefully they both figured it out, kind of.
I agree. I like that part of it now that you bring it up, because it shows that two otherwise decent people can just be wrong for each other. They're not wrong in general. They're just wrong in this specific relationship. It just doesn't work.
You know how there's like that glue and you have to have part A and part B, and when they get together, they work, like they activate one another.
Yeah.
It's almost the opposite for these two. They should not be blending. It's like a chemical mixture that is volatile.
Bleach and ammonia, let's say. Just bad things happen. Don't
By
ever mix them.
By themselves, they're fine.
Just fine. Yeah. It was fun to see Bas Rutten play himself, but from 40 years ago. Either he's aged well, or maybe he looked old when he was younger, or maybe the director liked him. I have to say, I don't know the man, never met him, but a lot of people talk fondly of Bas. I think he is actually exactly like that as a person. There's something about him that people like. They like working with him. But it was just kind of a little bit like, wait, is Bas playing himself? This is 1985. There's a surprise actor for me, I think he's even currently fighting, but a cage fighter named Ryan Bader plays Mark Coleman, who is a similarly named, unfortunately they both had Mark, but a character from that era, a fighter. And by the way, despite the name being spelled the same, no relation to Diedrich Bader. So that would have been fun in my opinion. Peter, check out Channel 9. But he was really a fantastic actor, especially for a person who is known for being a cage fighter. And as far as I know, he has been continuing the fighting and not taking acting lessons. So really, really good performance from him, admittedly in kind of his profession, but still very well done.
It was really well done. In fact, there was something about him that I kind of clocked. I asked you on the way home if he was the real guy, because although his acting was very, very good, there was just something about him. He seemed more like real or authentic. And so there was just something that I clocked. Like, either he's an amazing actor to kind of put on an actor who's not acting but acting, kind of, you know, like this weird. But anyway, but really well done. Like, he pulled off. And especially in those big moments, like the big dramatic scenes, I thought he pulled off really, really well.
Yeah, that was, I think, those scenes are where I was really surprised how well he did. We saw recently Jeremy Allen White, who I always know as Carmy on Hot Ones, and he mentioned one of the things he likes about being an actor is when he takes these roles, it's an excuse for him to do a brief but deep dive into something, whether it be cooking or wrestling or what have you, which I think is good if you enjoy that if you're an actor, because that's probably part of most roles. But isn't it interesting that I never would have thought that for someone in another profession to think, oh, this film is an excuse for me to do it this one time. Like, we don't think that Jeremy Allen White is going to suddenly open a celebrity restaurant after the show's over.
He may.
But we often think if somebody who's not an actor is in a film, like, oh, that's what they want to do now.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe they just wanted to do it the once and it was a good time and they had it. But there are some things about this film that I find fascinating from kind of a filmmaker's perspective. And one of them is this choice to shoot on film and the way that they produced and processed those images. I don't know if they did any digital post on them. I just read that they were shot on film. But there's a grain to it, which used to be an artifact, one almost might say a side effect or a detriment from the film process. Film, originally, they tried to get finer and finer grain so you wouldn't see it. The fact that you could see grain was just a limitation of the physical medium. And now we're coming back to add it into digital images. And I find that kind of a fascinating thing.
I know, I feel kind of bad because when we listen to that DGA podcast and you learn that they did select to shoot on film, I feel bad because there's some producer somewhere that tried to talk to the director out of it because of the amount of money it adds to the budget. And I hearken back to there's a Project Greenlight, was it 3 or 2?
Yeah, one, I think it was 3 at least.
Well, was 3 the scary movie? Then it was probably 2.
Okay.
So one of the green lights, the director wanted to shoot on film, and the producer went to great pains to say, no. Even sending him to, I believe, 2 separate editing production companies.
Yes, I remember this.
To show him how they could add the grain in post, and it would be far cheaper, and they could get
Correct.
the same look.
And this was 10 years ago or more.
Yeah. And was it like side by side? They were
Yeah.
like, they showed it like,
They shot test footage.
This is the
and
one.
They showed,
and,
yep.
And the guy was just like dead set, and on a certain level, I can admire that, like a la Quentin. Like Quentin's like, he's such a lover of film and he's such a lover of that style of filmmaking, and he doesn't want it to die. But also as a producer and someone who watches the budget,
right,
I feel, because it's like, oh no, you can achieve the look you want for a whole lot cheaper. So I'm
Right.
torn, but I probably fall more on shoot it digitally and do it in post. And so the fact that, was there a producer who's like, yeah, I love film too, and let's shoot it. Right.
There's
not,
at least one producer who's looking at the budget.
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you said like they lost $20 million. I just wonder how much of that budget was
film.
Yeah.
As an independent filmmaker, I have to shoot digital. I can't afford the cost of film. But I think conceptually, I would say use the best that you have to tell the story you want to tell. And I was thinking too, even before we had this recording, of what you were talking about, of that moment where they showed the film versus the digital and asked him, can you pick the difference? And I think now it's possible with these various post-processing methods that you can make it almost indistinguishable to the average person. Then is it just the cachet? Or like you said, for Quentin, we want to keep this alive. Because I'm thinking of the Forged in Fire series. Making knives by hand with a forge and a hammer is a ridiculously expensive and not cost ineffective way to make them. It just is. You can make them faster and cheaper and more accurate and reliable using modern mechanisms. But isn't it kind of cool that some guy with a handlebar mustache went into his garage for 5 weeks or whatever and made
And it's
this
like
thing?
a lost art, and shouldn't
Right.
we keep some of those basic things that we, activities that we used to do alive? Like to your example, you can go into almost any dollar store, drugstore, or grocery store and buy a package of Wonder Bread. But I think most people have baked bread at home, and the taste and experience of baking bread from scratch is a wonderful thing to do. So I admire both and I value both.
Exactly. Another example from perhaps a totally different direction is Ferrari's Formula One team has every car they've ever raced. And some of them they've sold to private collectors, but they keep them at the Ferrari Museum because they have made the engines and the cars from the very start. They have every design of every car, and they keep them running. That there are people who are employed to keep these older cars ready to go. And it's a 40-year-old car.
That's a pretty
And it'll
good
start
con
up.
that you get somebody else to buy a car that they don't even have possession of.
Well, and I think they also then pay you to keep it in running condition.
Wow.
It's a good deal.
Well, for Ferrari, not for the poor
But it
bastard.
showed this car from like 40 years ago up on the lift, and there is some Italian guy with a red shirt on who is wrenching on it. And they said because they have all the blueprints, they can keep them going. And I wonder if we could do a similar thing with these film cameras and projectors. Can we have enough films where we keep that knowledge, where we train each generation that this is a thing you can do? It's not cost effective, but I do think you mentioned the word experience. I think it's a cool experience. I don't know if I
The
want to
making
pay
of
for
it,
it.
or the viewing.
The whole thing, the whole project start to finish. I watched this web series the other day, and in there, a photographer says every once in a while he pulls out his film camera because it forces him to slow down and to think. And that is one of the downsides of digital. One of our filmmaking friends recently said, oh, this is digital. We can shoot as much as we want, which is true. I've said that as well. But does that lead to a certain style of, well, we'll fix it in post, that you
Yeah,
maybe
I've
don't have when you're paying for every foot of film? So all that to say, in this film, I don't know if I would have approached it saying it has to be shot on film, but I like that somebody did. I don't think it harms the film. It's a different maybe look or style than I would have gone for, but this is art, so that's totally cool. I don't know whether or not it affected the performances. I don't think it would, but it would be curious to ask actors, does this in any way affect you if we were doing film or digital?
That's interesting you say that, because I recently attended a screening and was listening to the actors talking about a digital filmmaking process, and they appreciated that they could keep moving. It helped them stay in character because there wasn't these long breaks for the camera department to set
Right.
up lights and to tweak and to switch lenses and all the stuff that
Right.
happens on bigger sets. And so the actors appreciated the speed that the digital filmmaking
Yeah.
gave them.
One of the things our friend Dustin talks about with certain digital cameras is their physical small size and lightweight allows both different camera movements by the camera op as well as different movements in the space. James Gunn talked about having the ability to move cameras and move actors and do things differently. So that's why I hesitate to say, oh, film's the greatest and we should not move to digital. Digital gives us some cool things that we couldn't do otherwise. One of the things that I did read that I don't think could possibly be true is they said that The Rock gained 50 pounds to 260 for this role. And I don't think he walks around at 210 pounds. This guy's huge. But he definitely shifted his physique. And that's, again, kind of digital versus real. Instead of having them CGI him to have bigger muscles, he changed his physique to match Mark Kerr's physique, which was very heavy in the shoulders and chest and neck, a very typical wrestler point of view. And that reminds me of what I had heard Arnold Schwarzenegger was able to do in his early career. He was able to change his physique in certain ways. He could make certain parts bigger and other parts smaller. And not being able to do that myself, I have no idea how you do that. It just seems miraculous to me to not just the face, but also the whole body and the style of his walking. We had talked about, apparently during the premiere at Cannes, the son of Mark Kerr leaned over to him and said, he walks like you and he talks like you.
He said to his dad.
Yeah, to his dad. So I think that, by the way, circling back, is why I feel like The Rock should at least get a nomination for this performance. I would not be sad if he got an Oscar for this. I was amazed at how he captured another person. And so you're kind of familiar. You mentioned the charisma, The Rock with the eyebrow, and he has the catchphrases from his wrestling days. So I wouldn't have been surprised if he came on screen and he was very charismatic, and I love the character. That's kind of what you would expect. But to have him completely become this different person is really quite amazing, I think.
Especially because, and I feel like, our people other than Dwayne, we're like belaboring a point, but But I think The Rock has such an over the top, larger than life, quite literally, but even personality.
Yep.
And Mark Kerr,
Yeah.
he has such a quiet, small,
And restrained, right?
yeah, for him to pull that off, because at the end of the movie they let you see Mark, and I think I did after we see this, I looked up a couple interviews. He's like a quieter man.
Yeah.
He's just the opposite of The Rock. When you think of The Rock, he comes
Right.
out and he's big and he's large and he's got his arms up in the air and, you know,
Right.
he's doing all the poses, and Mark was just the antithesis of that, and Dwayne became that in this movie. And so, yeah, I agree. I would not be sad to see. I would probably be crying at during his acceptance speech, because I would be championing him on. And I don't know who else will be up. We'll know in a few months. But I'm trying to think back at this year who could be contenders. And sadly, because of his iconography, I could see the Academy overlooking him. I wonder, would he get any, like, the Spirit Award or
Even the Golden Globes.
the
maybe.
Golden Globe? Yeah. Like, could he maybe get recognized in other ways? I would love it.
So it's probably less of a change, but credit also to Emily Blunt for whatever she did, because she looked to be 25 to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily that I would have, when casting for this, put her name at the top of the list, because just kind of age and whole vibe, she doesn't seem to match his wife, but
Well,
I thought she did very well.
I think the reason, which I think helped the movie in general, is her and Dwayne have a special
Yeah,
relationship
they're
because
good
of
buddies.
previous work they've done. She really championed. This has been something he's been wanting to do for a really long time,
Right.
like 10 years or something, I remember
Yeah, it
hearing.
was quite some time with he and the director,
And she was like, I'll help you make it. And I think they individually had reached out, or maybe just the director reached out to Dwayne and the message didn't get. And so the director was in Oppenheimer, I believe. And
Correct.
so he was talking to Emily, saying like, oh, well, I reached out to him. And she was like, no, I'll help you. And so like she kind of made it happen. So I think in a way, I don't know if it was like a favor, like, hey, thanks for making this. Or, I mean, she's a very talented actress, and who wouldn't want to work with her?
Totally.
So was the director like, yeah, I enjoyed working with you on Oppenheimer. Let's
Right.
have you portray Dawn in
Please
The
don't
Smashing.
hear criticism. I'd love to have her in any of my films. Just given, it was similar to when the director chose Bas Rutten to play himself. It was maybe an unconventional choice, but I think it worked. I was headed and I derailed myself. I was going to say, I think it helped the scenes where they had to be violent, because I bet there's a trust amongst Emily and Dwayne. That would make sense.
He doesn't want to hurt her. She knows that. But she had to trust that, especially with his wrestling background, that probably helped him, you know, like, what do they call it? Not throw a punch, but
well, he could
pull
sell
a
things.
punch.
Yeah.
Pull a punch.
I want to return to that The Rock is a gigantic human being.
Mm-hmm.
And for any of us to be in the room where he is smashing things, there is at just a basic primate level, that's got to be terrifying.
Yeah, even a hollow core door. I don't think I could do what he did to that hollow core door.
Yeah, and like I said, not that he's a violent person. I'm
Right.
not saying anything like that. But I think just at a certain level, when you're like, holy crap, this is a giant angry human, and I am really nearby. Yes, I think you're right. The trust would be great to have that previous relationship where you worked well together. And that's in some sense, though, part of acting is a lot of times they don't, and they're still able to land it. But just in this case, again, this was a good movie in a way I didn't expect. I really liked it, but it wasn't at all what I thought I was getting in for. In a sense, that reminds me of Honora. I didn't know what I was getting in for, but boy, did I like it when I was done. I don't know if this is going to win an Oscar like Honora did, but it did, in that sense, surprise me. in a good kind of way. And I have really just good things to say about the film. I'm tempted to go watch the documentary that has the same name because
I'm in.
Like I said, I was aware of the marks at that time. I didn't follow the Japanese fighting as well as the UFC stuff, but I was aware of what was going on. So that might be an
Because you had heard of him.
documentary. Oh yeah. And I think I'd seen him fight. I don't know if it was in Pride or if it was another thing. So the character wasn't a surprise to me. It's an interesting story. It's an interesting era. Ultimately, it's a little bit sad knowing what we know, right? It's not really like the Rudy story where he ends up being the champion he always wanted to be. I think the nature of that profession is you never go out on top. Every career, I think, ends with disappointment. Mm-hmm. And we saw recently in something a person said about football, all but one team's seasons end badly. Only one person wins the Super Bowl. Everybody else is disappointed. And I think that's probably true to a degree that we don't realize, and this film was good in that it showed what it's like for a hyper-competitive person to not be the champion.
Yeah, it was so touching. Like, I bet it was kind of bittersweet because in the DGA podcast, which I will never stop talking about because it's so well done, it's one of my favorites. I wish they would do every movie I watch. I'm always disappointed when I scroll through a new movie that I just said, and it's not part of it. The director said that, I want to say it was at Venice, but maybe it was a different film festival, so forgive me, it's been a few weeks since we listened to it. But he said, Mark, there's a pretty pivotal fight scene between Dawn and he said that Mark broke down and he was weeping at happening to watch it. And it would be hard to watch one of your worst moments in life being portrayed on camera. So the director was scared at first, and he actually reached down and he said he held his hand through the rest of the film, which I thought, wow, for, two men, generally, that's not something, especially heterosexual men, that's not something. But anyway, so he comforted him. And at the end, I think the director was kind of holding his breath. Like, how's he going to feel? Did I embarrass him? Did I exploit him? And he said, Mark said to him, I felt discarded and I felt thrown away. And now I feel like somebody understood me and saw me and got me, kind of. That would be really, really hard to feel like you kind of put your life into this thing. Other people obviously made money on him, and hopefully he made enough to be comfortable. We don't know. But to feel like you were just kind of cast aside and thrown away, because I'm sure like some new young buck, and bodies get old and they get beaten up and you can't perform the way you used to perform. You probably do kind of like... what they call it, like burnout or like flame out kind of, and then you're just cast aside. There's a day when that was your last fight, and do you know it or not? We don't. Right. I just thought, I hope that this man can live out the rest of his days feeling a little bit better, feeling a little bit of, when Dwayne Johnson portrays you in a movie, that's got to give you a little pep in your step. I don't know, maybe not.
I think of a quote we heard in a documentary recently about John Candy, where they mention that people think that a person who is physically big is impervious to pain. You can say anything because they're just so big you can't hurt them physically or emotionally. And this film, I think, goes a little bit toward dissolving that myth that even though here was a guy, his nickname was the Smashing Machine, he was 260 pounds of muscle and a wrestler and a tough guy and a fighter and all this, and he still obviously felt pain, emotional as well as physical. So, great film. Any last thoughts on the Smashing Machine?
No, please see it when I don't know, I should have looked up what streaming service they think it'll be on, but when you see it on whatever streaming service, watch it.
Yeah, I recommend it. It's a good watch. And never forget, Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.